you, Caroline and Melanie, for joining us this morning on International Women's Day. I wonder if we could just start, if you would like to introduce yourselves.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Caroline Taylor, the Chief Executive at a charity called Essex Community Foundation.
Hi Nicola, it's great to be here. I'm Melanie Craig and I'm Chief Executive of Suffolk Community Foundation.
Brilliant. And I'm Nicola Weldon, Partner and Head of the Private Client Department here at Ellison's. So I suppose a good place to start is just how you think the charity sector is doing at the moment. Obviously we've got austerity, we've got the cost of living crisis, financial pinch. And I just wonder, are you seeing an increase in demand for grants, particularly I suppose in relation to groups supporting women's causes?
Yeah, a huge increase in demand. We are. I mean, from all types of organisations addressing all sorts of issues. But I think certainly the charities in Essex tell us that the cost of living crisis and the high inflation rate, it's a much harder time than it was during COVID.
Really?
Yeah. So coming out of COVID straight into that has been exceptionally difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the same in Suffolk, of course, it's the same across the whole country. The charitable sector is facing higher bills themselves, higher costs for their workforce, higher demand for their services, because the issues are much deeper in society overall, and the need is much greater, and the funding streams are reducing, so they are really struggling. Particularly to cover their overall running costs. And often charities will apply to community foundations or other funders for a grant to deliver a particular service, and that may or may not be successful, but they've still got their core overheads, and who meets those? So yeah, it's never been harder for the charitable sector.
And are you seeing an increase in demands, perhaps from groups supporting women's causes as well, women and girls?
Yeah, we are, and I think definitely, and many of the issues are issues that are not new issues, but everything has got worse. And it's hard to think about anything in society that's actually got better. People are struggling economically, people are with their living costs, poverty is deepening, mental health is just a huge increase in deteriorating mental health. People's diets are worsening and therefore they get sicker. People's physical health is worsening as a result of diet and all of those issues. And the offer from the public sector, which many people from the government, from local authorities, from the NHS, is reduced. So charities often will move in to try and pick up some of the demand.
So do you have many funds in your respective foundations specifically for women's causes, I wonder, or are they more generic?
We certainly have some, and I think it's important to make the point about who the charity sector in Essex actually are, in that it's a very large sector of small organisations, and so often they're the types of organisations that will respond to multiple issues within a community. So there aren't that many, we don't have high numbers of women-only groups specifically. It's far more likely that it's an organisation that will provide mental health or family guidance, something within the community that covers a broader range of issues.
I suppose that's what you were saying, Melanie, there are so many issues that all overlap with one another.
Yeah, and typically smaller organisations will cover a broader range of issues. Larger ones can be a bit more specialised. In Essex we've got 5,000 registered charities and the majority of them have an annual income of less than £50,000. So they're small organisations that are kind of hyper-local, so they're working within their communities, doing their thing. But we also do have specialist charities in Essex that work around domestic abuse, for example, both with victim and perpetrators, and they saw a massive increase through COVID of demand for their services. There was a real concern coming out of COVID that would really be a significant increase in demand again when people were let out of their homes. that would increase. And I think what we have found through cost of living is that organisations are telling us that coercive control and economic abuse is becoming more of an issue in families through domestic abuse related type situations, really. So that, again, it comes to us in different ways from different types of organisations, but they are very prevalent issues all the time.
Yeah. So as we've come out of the pandemic, then have you seen things get worse, perhaps in a different direction?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And the complexity, I think it's not just the increasing numbers, it's the complexity of people's, as Melanie says, it's the complexities of people's problems. And often the sector picks it up because if you have a mental health problem, you try to access mental health services, and they might think that actually your problem is an addiction, they'll send you away. And so where do you go? So I think often it's the charity sector that we see can fill the gaps.
And I just wonder, I don't know if there is going to be anything, but in the budget announcement later today, is there anything we're expecting that might encourage people to make more charitable gifting or philanthropy?
Well, we'll
yeah,
it would be amazing,
yeah.
because actually the impact, I mean, it is easy at times to feel, I find, complete despair. Where is this going to end, and you know, what's the point? But actually, just one of the most motivating things I find in this role is actually seeing the impact that those very small charities do make and can make, and they actually need a very small amount of money to make a huge difference. So, like Caroline was saying, I mean, in Suffolk we've got 3,000 registered charities, about 12,000 community groups that are operating across the county at a really high political level. Many of them will need £500 to exist. And the type of charities that we support in Suffolk, some of them are charities that do specifically target women's needs, that will make a difference to all of those issues that I've described: mental health, poverty, overall well-being, self-esteem, aspiration, education. And some of those will be things, charities and groups, actually like the Girl Guides, the Brownies, in deprived areas of Suffolk, for example, particularly. They run with very little money, very little resources, run by volunteers. You know, remember Brownell was a volunteer, and you know, we will make grants for things like actually paying for the guides to take a group of girls up to London for the first time in their life. Yeah, I mean, this is about just aspiration, education, motivation. So it can be things like that. Also, you know, at the other end, domestic abuse. There's been a massive increase in domestic abuse overall post-pandemic, and the types of domestic abuse, I think, has worsened. There's now much greater risks from cyber, internet type abuse targeted at women, and whole new terminology that didn't exist even like maybe 5-6 years ago. So many groups will specifically work with women around that, women's aid, refuge groups, and charities in Suffolk, which is really important, and then others will be more general. So breastfeeding groups, you know, that's something that, you know, will make a massive difference to women, to mothers and their families. But women need support. There's very little support available for women to breastfeed. And that's one of the things that actually will make a massive difference. So we support a support group working in more deprived areas of Suffolk to help women continue to breastfeed. And there'll be a whole range. Also, I'm thinking about Ormiston families, Caroline, that will cover Essex as well. And they are a group that have particular services to support women who are going into prison. Very hard-hitting work they do, working with women and their families as women go into prison, and the risk of their children being permanently removed. So there is an enormous range. And we at Suffolk Community Foundation have a Women and Girls Fund, which is, I think, one of the most important giving groups we've got. It's a really accessible way for people in Suffolk to give money that can then make a contribution into the impacted women and girls in Suffolk. £500 a year, actually, and that money goes to fund some of the groups that I've mentioned.
So I imagine you've seen an increase in demand for grants from that fund.
Yeah.
So you've both mentioned that even post-pandemic how women's issues have got worse, the groups covered a whole breadth of different issues. What do you think is causing that? Do you think it's financial? Do you think it's like social media? Or is it just a combination of all the factors in society that we live in? It's a really dramatic question.
I mean, I think it's probably not one thing, it's lots of different things. And I think, you know, as Melanie was saying, you kind of despair when you hear the news. I mean, even this morning or recently, there has been news about the backlog of rape cases. Some people have been waiting over 3 years to actually get to trial. So I think it's not uncommon for society's issues to impact on women first and in a greater, more significant way. Often because they are working minimum wage jobs. It's the majority of people in minimum wage jobs are women. I think when we get into thinking about ethnic minority groups as well, they can be harder hit and disproportionately hit. So I think it does feel very challenging, but the beauty of this job is the connections and the knowledge of so many different types of people within our communities who see these issues and work together to try and not necessarily solve them all the time, but at least try and provide some support to people. And we get to see that through our work all the time, with thousands and thousands of volunteers and the effort that's put in to helping people in our communities. And that's only possible because of the community philanthropy and the way we work with our donors and supporters who give through us to try and address local causes, often to organisations that they will have never heard of before or are unlikely to know because they're not the household names. They're small organisations, but they're very much the kind of glue that holds it all together, and they're the types of organisations that have great social value and give our donors a lot of joy actually in being able to support them and find out what they're doing.
I suppose if anybody's watching this video, and we've spoken about an awful lot of support that is out there, but where would people go to find the support? Is that where would they get signposted from, I suppose?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think many of the charities themselves will advertise, but the smaller groups that are at a very local level, communities themselves will know. Actually, a lot of the faith groups and churches will be able to signpost, as well as, you know, I'm thinking about some of the areas that I've been to, whether it's rural areas in Suffolk, in villages, through the sort of village networks, they will know of groups locally, and as some of the more some of the estates across Suffolk, in town centres, there will be community groups. I'm avoiding saying your GP as well, because GPs are not the GP themselves, but the health service are pretty inundated with requests. But there is what's called social prescribing through the NHS, where people have presented with seemingly health needs, but actually the solution may not be prescription for medication. It may be a prescription for something that can address the issue in a different way.
So I suppose the message is that for people to speak up, because there is help out
Yeah,
there.
totally. Yeah.
We'll go off a different tangent, and I'm going to ask you a personal question if you don't mind. You're both senior and important people in your organisations, and I just wondered if you encountered any difficulties as women on your way to those roles and your careers prior to that.
Yeah, I think it's never quite overt and obvious. Well, it can be, but equally it can be quite subtle and not so obvious. But I think it does happen, I think, which is why different representation at board level is really important, because you're going to want to see people who may look like you around a board table, or may have a similar experience to you around the board table. Because if you can't see that within an organisation, it's harder to find a connection to that organisation. And equally, I think if everyone around an interview panel we were just talking about, or a board table, looks and sounds the same, they're not going to recognise something in you either. So I think that's why representation matters hugely at a senior level. And it's not uncommon actually in the charity sector for women to be chief executives. It gets interesting when you get into the larger charities, that is typically more male. But in our network, the Community Foundation network, we have a high proportion of female chief executives in the charity sector. So actually I think the workforce of the charity sector does tend to be more female led as well. I don't know your experience.
Yeah, definitely. I think there inevitably will be, and have been for me personally, difficulties operating throughout my career at senior level. And I think some of those difficulties will come through perceptions of what's going on for the woman. Why is she wanting a senior role? The behaviours that women will exhibit maybe in a man will be tolerated, but those same behaviours in a woman will be seen quite differently in a negative way. However, I've had some amazing encouragement and role models throughout my career, which has, and I look back, not only is this International Women's Day today, but it's also Women's History Month. And I look back and think, I find that fascinating to look at all of the outstanding contributions of women in our history. And I again think, how far we've come actually is very motivating. Yes, there's still rampant misogyny in society, everywhere. It exists, right? In different sectors in the world, it exists in our country. However, we've come a long way, but we've got to keep going.
But I suppose on that way, if you could go back and speak to your younger selves and give yourselves a word of wisdom or advice to help you in your business journey, I suppose just life in general, what would you say?
My younger self would not listen to me. She was stubborn, still is to some degree. But I think it's important, I think in that context, it's just, trust your gut, do your own thing, keep going. Just keep on doing it. You're enough, it's all right. You'll make mistakes, they're the best learning opportunities, but surround yourself with good people, you'll be fine.
Brilliant advice.
I don't think we've got long enough for me to go with what advice I give myself. I think, there are always hard choices. I think being a working woman at a senior level, there are always hard choices. Especially if you have a family with a family, and I think I would probably two things I think particularly I would try and just spend more time to think about at an earlier stage. One would be how I looked after myself, and I was always in my earlier career very more focused on my physical health. I would try to exercise a lot, I would try to eat well, and I still do. But I probably just thought I could, fling myself into the week, work as hard as I could, collapse at the weekend, then go again on a Monday. And that kind of doesn't work. And I would have advised myself to really proactively spend more time thinking about mental health. And I think, it can be very difficult at times, and I know we're laughing about it, but the issues are real and cause a lot of hurt, upset and trauma for women and girls in society, particularly around misogynistic views and bullying and behaviours. And those are things that, you know, we have to keep going and keep showing the mirror up, which is important. I might have just tried to think about how much I actually can control, however, and the things you can control is how you respond.
Thank you both for that. I mean, just wondered if there's anything else that you particularly like to convey before we wrap up this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Nico. I mean, I think just I feel very fortunate to have had great encouragement opportunities growing up and throughout my career as a woman. Access to education, built my self-esteem, and I think that makes such a difference to girls, to women. We have lots of charities that are working through various different ways: sport, drama, music, art, and it will make the difference at an early age. And there are lots of charities, and I would encourage people, if they care about the area that they live, their community, there is money that they can give that will make a difference to and transform girls' lives to become the women that we want.
And like you said, it doesn't have to be a lot, does it?
Not at all.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it's kind of touched on the previous question about what would you say to your younger self, but I think there's something about just be clear about what you want, and I think it's okay to be able to say what you want, so that you have clarity about where you're going. I think, and do surround yourself with positive people who will support and help you. And I think if you can find women mentors, that's brilliant, and female coaches, as Melanie said, role models. They can be inspirational, but just say what it is you want and just go for it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and input. Thank you very much. Thank you.